Welcome to the zOSMF Product Installation Training. Broadcom is committed to assisting clients to simplify their transition to zOSMF software management of their mainframe software products. This is one of several courses to help our clients install and maintain their software products using zOSMF. This course covers a product installation using a Broadcom portable software instance. After you have completed this course, you should have an understanding of the steps to install a portable software instance using zOSMF. Remember that prior to installing, you must have acquired and added to zOSMF. This is an overview of the zOSMF process to deploy a software instance. You will select Deployments from the primary software management menu. This then opens the deployment checklist, which are the steps required to complete the installation of the product. Note that two of the deployment steps, submit deployment jobs and perform workflows, include sub-steps for jobs associated with deployment jobs and workflow jobs. There are 3 deployment jobs for all products and 1 or more workflow jobs based on the product. So let's get started. Let's log on to zOSMF. Select Software Management by double-clicking on the icon. Click on the deployment task to install a product that has been acquired. Define a new deployment by selecting New from the Actions drop-down menu. The deployment checklist will then display. Also, you can view, modify, cancel, copy, or remove existing deployments. Complete the deployment checklist items as described in defining new deployments in the IBM documentation. Click on Specify the properties for this deployment. As you complete the deployment checklist, be sure to make the following selections. Specify the properties for this deployment, which is the name, description, and optional categories. Then click OK. Now select the software to deploy. Click on Portable Software Instance, check the desired portable software instance, then click on OK. Click on Select the objective for this deployment. On the Select Deployment objective, click on Create a new software instance. Click on a new global CSI, select or enter the target system. Select No for Are you deploying ZOS? Then click OK. Click on Check for missing SYSMODs. There are 5 steps for the Check for missing SYSMODs. Click and review on Next to proceed. Check for missing SYSMODs and view missing SYSMODs report. For this step, deselect the following report options: requisite SYSMODs and fixed category reports, and regress SYSMODs and hold data delta reports. Click on Finish to bypass the next 3 Check for missing SYSMOD steps. Click on Configure this deployment to define the target software instance. There are 9 steps in the Configure deployment for the software instance. Review and click on Next to proceed. For dlibs, specify Yes to copy the distribution zones and libraries that are associated with the source software. The names and the storage class or volumes of the new datasets can be customized in a later step. Click Next. For model, check the source software to use a model. zOSMF uses the datasets, volumes, mount points, catalogs, and SMPE zones that are associated with the model to specify default values for the target software instance. Click on Next. Note, if the objective is to replace an existing software instance, the existing instance is used as the model. In this example, this is a new deployment of the new portable software instance. For SMPE zones, use the default dlib and tlib names or modify as required. Click Next. To modify the default dataset names in volume storage class, click Actions, select All, then click Actions again, then Modify. To change the defaults for datasets, change the target dataset name prefix to the one that you want to use for your deployment. Specify a volume or storage class to identify where to create the target datasets. Click OK to make the changes. Verify the changes and click Next to continue. For catalogs, no action is required, assuming that your target dataset prefix is defined in a user catalog. Click on Prefix, then Next. A summary is presented of the target datasets to be created and how much space is required. If there are no messages, click Finish. Click on Define the Job Settings. zOSMF creates the deployment jobs and summary. To define the job settings to generate the JCL, to install the software, and view the deployment summary. Use the default JCL dataset name and/or work dataset name prefix or update the desired dataset names. Update the location for work datasets as needed. Update the job statement as needed. Then click OK. Please note that some product installations may require larger region size for the deployment jobs. To avoid potential issues, add region equals 0M to the job statement. Click on Submit Deployment Jobs. From Submit Deployment Jobs, we can see that there are 3 deployment jobs. Select the first job, then click on Action. Click Submit Job to submit the first deployment job. Submitted will display under the status column. Note the Job has been submitted message in blue. Wait for each job to complete. Click on Refresh to check for job completion in zOSMF. Status complete indicates the job completed with a 0 return code. Possible status values can be canceled, complete, warning, error, or in progress. After successful completion of the first deployment job, follow the same procedure for the second deployment job. Note the status submitted for the second deployment job. Click on Refresh to check the job completion in zOSMF. Status complete indicates the second deployment job completed with a 0 return code. After successful completion of the first and second deployment jobs, follow the same procedure for the third deployment job. Status complete for all 3 deployment jobs indicates that the job's completed with a 0 return code. Click on Close to continue with the deployment checklist. Click on the Next Perform Workflows step. Most products have at least one of the following workflows. Post-SMPE workflow updates the CSI with site-specific external datasets, relinks load modules, and optionally mounts USS directories. Note, if prompted for the dataset name of a load library for an IBM product that is not installed, specify year installed. Base installation workflow configures a new software instance for your product software. Upgrade workflow updates an existing software instance for your product to a new product release. For the data product, there are all 3 workflows. Click on the workflow name to proceed with the first post-SMPE workflow. Each workflow can have multiple steps or jobs. Click on the first step for the post-SMPE workflow to proceed. This step defines software instance variables to be used in the workflow's Step 2 JCL. Each workflow step may have multiple properties that need to be reviewed or updated. Here is the general properties that describe prerequisite requirements. Here is the details properties that describe workflow step details. Here is the notes properties that describe workflow step actions that may be required. For this step, there are no notes. Here is the performance properties that defines the software instance variables for the next workflow step. Click on Next to edit output file path. Here is the perform properties for workflow step 1, which has 4 steps. The first step edits the output file path that will be used in the workflow step 1. Review the update the path name as required, then click on Next to proceed. Here is the perform properties that creates the job statement. Check Apply Updates to, all steps in, review the job statement, and update as required. Then click Next to proceed. Here is the perform properties that define the software instance variables. Review the JCL and update as required. Then click Next to proceed. Here is the perform properties that define software instance variables for the next workflow step. The JCL can optionally be saved to a ZOS Unix file or a ZOS dataset by checking on Save JCL and specifying the location. To submit the JCL, check Submit JCL and click Finish. After submitting the job, wait until the job completes and the status is updated with the completion code. Click Refresh to update the status. After getting completion code 0, click Close to complete Workflow 2's steps. Each workflow can have multiple steps and jobs. Click on the second step titled Generate and submit the JCL to update the SMPE dataset names for the post-SMPE workflow to proceed. Once again, we see that each workflow step may have multiple properties that need to be reviewed and updated. Here is the general properties that configures the workflow JCL. Here is the details property that describe workflow step details. Here is the dependencies properties that note the prerequisite jobs completed. Here is the notes properties that describe workflow step actions that may be required. For this step, there are no notes. Here is the perform properties that specify the required target zone dataset names, which should be updated with appropriate dataset names. After updating the dataset names, click on Next to proceed to the next Perform Review Instructions step. This is the Review Instructions step that is part of the Workflow Step 2. Review the instructions and click Next to proceed. Review the job statement and update as required, then click Next to proceed. Review the JCL and update as required, then click Next. The JCL can optionally be saved to a ZOS Unix file or a ZOS dataset by checking on Save JCL and specifying the location. To submit the JCL, check Submit JCL and click Finish. After submitting the job, wait until the job completes and the status is updated. Click Refresh to update the status. After getting completion code 0, click Close to complete Workflow Step 2. After successfully completing Workflows Step 1 and 2, click on the third step for the post-SMPE workflow to proceed. Here is the general properties that describe Workflow Step 3. Here is the details property that describe Workflow Step 3 details. Here is the dependencies properties. Note that prerequisite steps are completed. Here is the notes property that describes workflow step actions that may be required. For this step, there are no notes. Here is the performs property that specifies the 4 perform steps. Review the job statement and update as required, then click on Next to proceed. Review the JCL and update as required, then click Next to proceed. The JCL can optionally be saved to a ZOS Unix file or a ZOS dataset by checking on Save JCL and specifying the location. To submit the JCL, check Submit JCL, and click Finish. After submitting the job, wait until the job completes and the status is updated with the completion code. Click Refresh to update the status. After getting completion codes 0 for all 3 post-SMPE workflow steps, click Return to Workflows to proceed to the next workflow. Note, the post-SMPE workflows present 100%. Click the X to close this workflows window and proceed to the next workflow. Click on the Workflow Datacom DB install and follow the same process as Workflow 1. Since the workflow steps are similar for workflow steps 2 and 3, we will not repeat the steps for this presentation. After completing the Workflow Datacom DB base install, click on the Datacom DB upgrade and follow the same process as Workflow 1 and 2. Since the workflow steps are similar for workflow steps 2 and 3, we will not repeat the steps for this presentation. After all 3 workflows have been completed, click on Close to continue with the deployment steps. The last step is to review and update the target software instance properties. Review and update the instance name and description as needed. Optionally, select a predefined category for this product instance or click Action and then New to create a new category. After all of the deployment checklist steps have been completed, click on Close to complete the deployment. This deployment displays the successful completion of the Datacom DB deployment. Thank you for attending our training today, and if you need any further questions or assistance, please be sure to contact your product zOSMF advisor who can provide you any zOSMF training or consultation.